Hello, everyone, and welcome to all members of the Transnational Cinemas SIG and to our British partners. It is my honor today to introduce our special guest speaker, and please forgive me for mispronouncing his name again, Petr Szczepanik, who is an associate professor at Charles University in Prague. He's written several books, two books that I know of on Czech media industries of the 30s and on state socialist production. And he'll probably tell us about his latest work. But one of the impressive things about Petr is that he has led two European Union funded research projects and has established himself as a leading authority on production practices in Central and Eastern Europe. He has a really deep knowledge of the industry in a region that I think we ought to know more about, which is why I invited him. I met him first online, I guess it was in 2022 at the Society for Cinema Studies when it was remote. And I was just fascinated by his presentation on that region, and particularly his astute analysis of Netflix, good and bad, working in that area. It's the first time I had heard the concept of platform imperialism applied to Netflix, and I think that's probably one of the things that interested me the most. But I was able to meet him in person back in Denver, and we had a little discussion, and I just wanted to invite him here because I think he has so much to offer us. So I think he'll probably give us a little presentation using screen share, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. So thank you so much, Petr, for coming.
Thank you very much, Will and Nicole, for inviting me, and everybody else for taking your time on Friday. Well, not evening like here, but maybe noon in your case, but still, it's Friday. I'm greeting you from my cottage outside Prague. We are already in a weekend mood, but never mind. So I will start my presentation now. I hope you will see it properly. Sorry. So if something happens with the presentation, please let me know, but hopefully it will go smoothly. So as Will said, I will speak about impacts of streaming platforms on small peripheral markets and industries of East Central Europe, hopefully with some more general ramifications, which might open this kind of research to more comparative discussions with researchers outside Europe as well. So these are my two latest books. In one, the right one, we coined the term digital peripheries, which I will refer to today with several colleagues of mine, and the other one is a monograph on producers, on different kinds of producers in this East Central European region, which is composed of post-socialist countries, so-called Visegrad countries, basically Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary. That's my main focus. So I will start right away with the key term, which was already mentioned, and Maria might also be aware that it's actually Lenin who is considered the father of the term imperialism as it is used in like political studies and political economy and so on. But this term became important in media studies and political economy of media, communication, culture in the 70s, in the second half of the 70s, with American and British scholars like Herbert Schiller, Oliver Boyd Barrett, Jeremy Tunstall, and so on, who spoke about how the domination and concentration coming from US media companies is accompanied by cultural homogenization, erasure of local traditions and cultures and so on. So this has been a long discussion, long tradition of critical thought. And in the 90s and 2000s, it was strongly criticized by people from cultural studies, Orient studies, cultural anthropology, postmodernist theory, who said basically that it's not just one-way flows. It's not just the domination of large transnational corporations based in the US, but there are also contra flows, or there are also affinities which connect viewers to local content, which might be stronger than the affinity to American Hollywood or American TV content flowing from the US to the world. And there has been a wave of research looking at basically how viewers interpret content, how they give specific meanings based on their cultural context to content. So it's difficult to speak about homogenization, about indoctrination coming with the economic power and technological power, because there are various contexts and influences which actually decide on how we give sense to what we watch or what we read. But in the 2010s, the concept was somehow resuscitated, reintroduced into the debate on global media. And it was mainly thanks to new importance of platforms and streaming services, as discussed in works of Ramon Lobato, Dal Yongjin, Mark Steinberg, and so on, who brought our attention to the fact that this, one-way flows perhaps are coming back in a new form, that perhaps some new form of imperialism is taking shape through the power of platforms as intermediaries, as mediating, not just distribution, but increasingly also production in various countries of the world. So instead of just, American content replacing or annihilating local content, it's platforms who are somehow embedded into local cultures in a new way, transforming them from within, so to say, because platforms define themselves as mediators. They some of them like to say they are not media services, they are not editorially controlled, which is not the case of Netflix, and I will come back to this difference shortly. So this is the key concept and the key theoretical framework. And now the concept of peripheries. Again, an old concept, old discussion about center-periphery, hierarchies, inequalities, dependencies. It would seem that with internet and global distribution networks such as Netflix, such differences and hierarchies would disappear. But that's not the case. When we compare catalogs and availability of content in different regions, we see that Netflix is not the same in the US, not the same in Korea, not the same in Eastern Europe. There are different levels of investment in acquisitions, investment in local original content, which actually reflect the old inequalities quite strongly. So people who comparatively study Netflix catalogs, for example, they see that differences between Eastern and Western Europe are re-emerging very strongly. Differences between smaller, larger countries, between more and less mature media markets, and so on. So we can speak of digital peripheries in this sense, barriers, inequalities re-emerging in the digital environment where peripheries are sort of not predefined in a material sense, where barriers are not predefined in material sense by geographical distance, for example. So what we understand by digital peripheries is not just different levels of investment in content, different levels of presence of local content in catalogs, but it's also powerful industry players who are virtually missing in Eastern, Central Eastern Europe. If you look at the lists of the strongest producers, distributors, broadcasters, and so on, published by European Audiovisual Observatory, you would not find any companies from East Central Europe. These so-called European media conglomerates are all from Western Europe. So that's another feature which is very important when you think of how local producers are able to negotiate with Netflix, for example. If they don't have strong partners, they are at the mercy of the platform. So it's also about how strongly local producers are dependent on US platforms. If they don't have strong partners, such as, for example, European conglomerates, including RTL and so on, Sky or strong public broadcasters such as BBC or RAI, none of them are based in East Central Europe. Then they have less leverage when negotiating about rights, for example, about sharing rights, sharing revenues with Netflix, and so on. There are other aspects of peripherality. Peripherality is not the same as smallness. We can come back to that later. And this is one way of visualizing the peripherality of East Central Europe. You can see the so-called Big Five countries in terms of non-national film releases, which is we can say it's export power of audiovisual content coming from these Big Five countries: France, Great Britain, Germany, and Italy, and Spain. All the rest is quite small share in terms of cross-border circulation in Europe. This is slightly older than I would like it to be. It's because I don't have comparable data from more recent period, but it's a very good visualization which shows that the whole East Central Europe or Central and Eastern Europe is in the last section, top left, where all the countries are in the section under 1% of the share of non-national film releases. So this is one way to see how peripheral East Central Europe is in terms of outgoing content flows. This is another way. It's a specific metric Audiovisual Observatory uses called export efficiency. Again, East Central Europe on the right with lowest numbers of values. So this is to lay the field for discussion. And now one conceptual difference which is quite important for people in platform studies. They would say that Netflix is not a platform. So I want to bring your attention to this distinction, but very shortly. So basically the strong definition of platform is multi-sided content, multi-sided market and a semi-open infrastructure, which is, for example, YouTube. There are different players which can operate on YouTube, interacting with each other, transacting with each other, such as multi-channel networks, users, content creators, and the platform itself. So it's multi-sided market. It's semi-open infrastructure because it provides means for different parties to produce, monetize, distribute, and so on. On the other hand, Netflix is not semi-open and it's not multi-sided. It's one-sided. It's just the end user who pays for an access to a catalog and nothing else. It's about controlling IP, it's editorially controlled catalog, and so on. So the monetization system is different, but there are also similarities. And that's what I'm interested in. So I wouldn't agree with people who would say, you know, we need to exclude Netflix from discussion about platformization. I would say that there are strong similarities which justify including Netflix into the discussion about platforms, platform imperialism, platformization, and so on. And that's, for example, monopolization tendencies. It's not so about network effects like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and so on, but it's about exclusive control of copyrights, ideally global rights for eternity. That's what Netflix wants when it's producing original titles in Korea or in Poland or anywhere. It's also about creating effects of platform dependency. That's very important for discussing the relationship between Netflix and independent producers in peripheral countries, where they don't have strong backers, such as conglomerates, broadcasters who can negotiate sharing rights and revenues. They are usually, you know, given full budget or maybe 110% budget, full financing for full control of rights, which they give to Netflix, all the rights for all the distribution channels for eternity for global markets. And step by step, they become dependent because they realize that the levels of financing and the comfort of the easiness of getting all the budget at once as a flat fee front end payment is is unprecedented in these fragmented peripheral markets where you otherwise have to negotiate with different players, have to apply for public funding and so on, which is a very difficult, tiresome process. With Netflix, you don't have to do anything of that. You get one payment or maybe split into several payments, but very easy, very quick. There are platform imaginaries which are also similar. So how do we imagine platforms transforming our business, our cultural work, our aesthetics? That's an important concept which brings our attention to the cultural effects of platforms, how they are internalized, and how they are how they figure in the agency of producers or other players. So in the case of producers, is about imagining that Netflix will free them from the hurdles of commissioning, of the difficult process of TV commissioning, basically. Will give them more freedom, more creative freedom, more genre diversity, and so on. We'll come back to it later. There are other similarities as well. So basically, the geography is very important in recent discussions. And while platforms decentralize production means, so they give you means to produce, they give you access to global distribution network, they at the same time centralize power. So it's a combination of centralizing power and control with the decentralization of production means. And that's a key to understand what they can do to local markets, local media ecosystems. They can appear as liberators from different kinds of limits and barriers, while at the same time creating dependencies. And it's also regionalism. So I'm interested, as you will see in the next slide, in how platforms are dividing the world, how they are constructing markets in geographic terms, via licensing, for example, via acquisition. So this is basically how Netflix conceptualizes East Central Europe. In East Central Europe, before Netflix, you would not probably say that Warsaw is a center, is a cultural center. At least it's not. It was not a common perception. Now Warsaw appears as a we might say semi-peripheral media capital of East Central Europe. Most of these streamers have an office there or production branch there, including Netflix, including Canal Plus, including also Viaplay, which is not a US but an important Scandinavian SVOD. But also Disney is planning for an original production in Poland, and so on. It's not just about producing Polish language content. It's not just about controlling distribution from Poland in the whole region, but it's also about planning original production in other countries, mainly Romania and the Czech Republic, from Poland, from Warsaw. And it's actually important for Netflix because predictions say that East Central Europe, mainly Poland, is a key growth market after the exit from Russia and after the war in Ukraine started. Poland is now a key market in this region because it's 40 million people, because it's quite mature comparing to other countries in the region. So this is how Netflix and other streaming platforms are actually carving out or constructing the region, and they create hierarchies. The key hierarchy I'm interested in is a hierarchy between original local production and service production. So while Warsaw became a center of original local production, not just Polish, but also planning, as I said, original production in other countries, Prague and Budapest became centers of peripheral, of service production of these platforms. So American series by funded by Amazon, Apple TV Plus, Netflix, films and series as well, are often being shot on locations and in studios in Warsaw and Prague. That's not a new thing. This has been happening since the 60s, and I have written some studies about that. There's a long history of service production in the region, and even of competition between Prague and Budapest that started in the 60s. But what's new is that each of these projects, Carnival Row, The Wheel of Time, Greyman, and so on, is larger in volume than the whole national film production annually. So it's a huge leap forward. It's a huge quantitative increase. They are employing hundreds of people. They are going on for 1 or 2 years because they are returning series often, and it's often a fantasy genre. Tim Havens has written about that interestingly, why fantasy genre is being often produced in East Central Europe, because of the nature, old villages, but also some kind of cultural aspects of, as Aniko Imre said, you know, whiteness and masculinity perhaps, and so on. That's another topic for discussion. So that's production, and how production is actually transformed by platforms. And what you see now is licensing, how you can see center periphery hierarchies through licensing. So this is national titles in foreign Netflix catalogs. So you see these countries from East Central Europe compared to larger countries in Europe, Germany and France. And you see how many more titles these larger countries have in foreign catalogs, but you also see the distribution of the quantity of titles in foreign catalogs. So as these two examples show of the local hits in the Czech Republic, if movies or series travel anywhere from the local markets, they usually don't travel at all. So there are like 200 Czech titles in Netflix catalog in the Czech Republic, but most of them don't travel anywhere. It's, you know, trapped in the local market. But if they travel, they often travel to these countries: Poland, Romania, Slovakia, Hungary. So this is how, again, Netflix constructs borders and hierarchies in the region via licensing. So via licensing, which limits the the geography of circulation of specific titles. And this is platform imaginaries, which were mentioned in the beginning. So I did a quantitative and qualitative research with local producers, with a group of colleagues of mine here in Prague. And we asked them about first numbers, you know, annual turnover, average budget, number of titles in a portfolio, and employees, and so on. But we also asked them about what do they plan to do in terms of their production strategy, partners, innovation of product, and so on. That was in 21 during COVID still, and most of them, although being film producers mainly, they said they want to shift to TV series and VOD content. They want to work for Netflix, although they didn't have any experience with that. And they were quite optimistic, quite hopeful that Netflix will liberate them from the limits and difficulties of TV commissioning, of applying for public funding, which is, as you see in the middle graph, absolutely crucial for financing a film or a TV series in lesser extent, but film, national and European public support, production services, which is, you recall from the previous slide, also commercials. So you have to combine a lot of activities together to survive as a producer. And if you are a producer in Czech Republic or Poland, you are a very small company. You are a micro company, which you see on the left graph. So you are actually very small size. There are no mini majors. There are no studios in West European sense in the region. So what can we learn from these data? What can we learn from this kind of observations? So first, an emerging region, which is a very specific region, co-constructed by transnational or global platforms. There are other regions, of course. Netflix circulates specific content in Southeast Asia, for example. Let's say Indian or Korean content. There are regional markets for it. It's there is a region constructed by licensing also in Latin America. Let's think of Brazilian telenovelas and so on. This region has nothing like that in common. There is no popular content coming from Hungary to Poland or from Romania to Czech Republic, with one exception, and that's Czechia and Slovakia, because historical ties between these two countries, which were for many years one country. But otherwise, it's a top-down constructed region, which has no cultural affinities comparable to the other regions we know from the well-traveling non-US content in different parts of the world. So there is a common political history, but there are no common taste cultures, and there is a new center which is also sort of top-down decision. It's not a natural center of the region, Warsaw. So this is an example how platforms are actually shaping, constructing culturally and economically markets. And just two examples of past dependency, because Netflix is not new, not the first one who did that. HBO Europe was actually the first one. HBO Europe started in Eastern Europe before it went to Western Europe, because there was no competition. It was easy to acquire rights for these local markets. So they started in the mid-90s in Hungary, and then they went to also Poland, Czech Republic, Romania, and they started producing original content in 2010. So they sort of pioneered what Netflix has been doing in the last 5-7 years. They started that already about 13 years ago. They stopped this year. They actually stopped all original production after merging with Discovery, and Zaslav is being linked to the decision, of course, and a lot of original content disappeared from HBO or Max now catalogs, but still HBO was a pioneer of conceptualizing this region as a market. And that then there are some transnational companies in the region, basically just one which is comparable to what we are talking about, and that's CME. And CME has now the most successful SVOD service called Voyo, also operates across several markets, a slightly different composition of markets. I think I will slowly end here, but just last mention that apart from licensing, production, we can also think of regulation and how platforms are actually so to say peripheralizing the region by strongly lobbying local regulators to implement as soft regulation as possible, to stay in the East European category, where all the financial obligations for transnational streamers are as low as possible, not comparable to the large markets of Western Europe. I was part of one of these processes, implementation of so-called AVMSD, and that was a very difficult process where Netflix was really strongly lobbying, pressuring local politicians and saying, you need to stay in Eastern Europe, don't look at even Denmark or Belgium as small markets to compare with. So I will end with how Netflix and other platforms are having geographical impacts on the region in terms of constructing digital peripheries, and how they might be considered imperialist in a sense of centralizing power while decentralizing production means. And how they also impact the agency of producers by inspiring specific hopes and imaginaries, which then make them more susceptible to giving up on rights and future revenues of their companies. So that's the main part I wanted to present, and I hope there will be opportunity to discuss details in the discussion. Thank you.
So once you get back the screen, Pedro, we'll see if there are any questions on the chat. Again, I'd like to invite you to introduce yourself briefly in the white space of the chat. And if you have a question, just raise your hand, and if nobody else is speaking, just unmute yourself. Give people time to think. Let me start then, Pedro. I'm fascinated by this concept of imaginaries. And I know you've had a chance to do some research with some of these smaller companies that imagine that Netflix would give them creative freedom, it would be an alternative to the local rules and regulations, which are sometimes pretty restrictive. So what do they actually say to you? Do they still have this concept?
Yeah, I think there is a cycle which you can observe in countries where they have been producing for a longer period, like in Korea, for example, or the UK or elsewhere. In the last couple of years, you can see that there is a more critical perception that Netflix is basically reducing producers to service producers who just deliver the production services and end up with no rights, just the flat fee. And that's very problematic in a longer perspective when the producers want to finance development of their projects and have no revenue stream for that. When they want to autonomously, decide about distribution and selling their content in various distribution windows, including cinema and broadcasting. And so on. So there is this critical sort of turn in how Netflix is being perceived by the producers. But in the early stages, it was really very optimistic. Higher budgets, higher production values, more production freedom. A simple process of commissioning and so on. So I think there is a process which is being repeated in various countries, depending on how long Netflix operates as producer or commissioner. So, for example, in Poland, there is still this optimism because Poland is the center of original local production. As I said, Netflix is not producing very much apart from Poland in the region. There are just plans, discussions, but Poland is really the hub. And you can see that Netflix, for example, is producing, queer films or TV series. It's very, progressive in a way in a country like Poland, which is strongly Catholic and which is ruled by a very conservative right-wing government, which is oppressing LGBTQ community, and they are introducing films about, for example, a trans high school person, or about a gay community under communism, and so on, or about a drag queen, which is kind of funny social fairy tale. About a drag queen organizing some charity show in a rural Poland town, which is difficult to imagine in reality, but it functions as a social fairy tale. So this would be difficult to do for any other broadcaster in Poland. So they have this ability to inspire hopes and expectations, high expectations in the creative community and among independent producers. But in the last couple of years, there is also a perception that it's extremely pragmatic. It's very much about control of IP, and that Netflix is moving more and more towards more like predictable, standardized commercial product in this market after testing quite diverse projects, including these progressive films or series. Yeah, so I would say that these imaginaries are changing and shifting in time, but they are different in larger markets and smaller markets, where independent producers are actually have no partners, have to work with the public funds, with the broadcasters, and they have nobody else. Then Netflix comes, and they are eager to replace the broadcasters for Netflix, because they have better experience with local broadcasters as well.
Thanks for that. Yeah. Somebody else have a question, Maria?
We have a question from Philip Drake.
Oh.
He writes, "Hi, all. Good to see you, Peter. Very informative presentation. Can I ask what you think the solutions might be to the issues you raised? more EU regulation for Netflix? What do local producers think, and does it differ markedly between the various countries you discuss?
Yeah, I totally I believe in regulation, and I think the Audiovisual Media Services Directive is giving small countries strong instruments to regulate global platforms in favor of local ecosystems. Basically, two key instruments. One is levies, the other one is direct investment obligations. And you can have a look at the, I have a map of Europe in terms of what kind of regulation they implement in my presentation, but I didn't have time to show it. But basically, Eastern Europe is weaker, as I said, than Western Europe, but still it's better than nothing. So we have a proposal now, which I was part of a working group negotiating that, and it's basically 2% levies and 1.5% direct investment obligations, which is very low comparing to France, but it's still better than nothing. So it will hopefully push Netflix to treat the small peripheral market slightly better, very slightly, but still. Also, it will push it to treat local producers as partners a little more than they would otherwise. Hopefully, we'll see how it goes. There are a lot of, there's a lot of disappointment in other countries how this regulation works out in the end, but I still believe that it's the strongest, strongest way to sort of to change the the market power and the impact of platform imperialism. We don't have anything else, I think.
Yes, that's a great response. I mean, it seems that is somewhat a solution that we have to look to. I mean, obviously, Netflix is getting involved in politics. So there's another question here. My name is Luis Felipe. I'm a PhD student at University of Campinas, Brazil. I'm currently investigating crime fiction in Latin America. I have a question. In your presentation, you said that being identified in the periphery does not equate to smallness or being solely regarded as a consumer country region. Could you please expand on that? Thank you.
Yes. I actually compared small West European countries with smaller and larger East European countries or East Central European countries. So if you look at Denmark or Belgium, they are small, but not peripheral in the same sense or in the same level as Poland, which is not small. It's 40 million people, but it's peripheral in terms of outgoing flows of content, in terms of powerful players and other aspects of peripherality, which I mentioned. But still, it's moving towards more central position within the region than other countries such as Romania or the Czech Republic, because it was chosen as a seat, as a place to establish like regional control by the platforms. So small is not peripheral, because some of these small countries can become quite strong in exporting and also in developing strong players, such as all the Scandinavian countries. You have several strong transnational companies based in Scandinavia, such as Viaplay, for example. And you don't have that in East European countries, although Scandinavian countries are all very small by the measure of population. It's like 5 to 10 million people, so it's quite small, but it's not peripheral in the same sense as the Czech Republic, for example. Yeah, and then you have large and peripheral countries like Romania, for example, 18 million, Poland 40, and so on.
Thank you.
Maria, you had your hand up for a while. Would you unmute yourself, please? And
yes.
Speak?
Hi. I think it's okay to ask in person, right? I don't have to put it in the chat.
Yeah, you don't have to.
Okay, great. So I have lots of questions, and basically Absolutely. I mean, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Sounds like you have witnessed this, and it's frustrating. And it's true that they're imperialistic. There's no question about it. So, Mike, so to push against that a little bit, like in the US, Netflix is considered to be a huge deal because they take risks, right? You're saying that they took risks at first, now they're going more into commercial content. But in the end result, like say Netflix pulls out tomorrow, does European production, Eastern European production, let's say, Eastern European production is better off because there are more people, there's more content, there are themes, you know, that have been touched that would not have been without Netflix. So does it have a positive effect overall, you know, globally, is not globally, but you know, overall, in any way?
Yeah. I think there is an excellent discussion about that in Korea. So you can see what happened in Korea. It seems that Netflix monopolized, you know, higher budget, exportable genre production by increasing costs and also fees for the creatives. So now the production companies are more and more, you know, eager to work for Netflix since about 2016, and by getting higher front-end fees, they made the personnel, the talent partners used to higher income levels, and it's there's no way back. And local broadcasters can't compete with that, so they are actually relegated to lower quality content, basically. So if you want first-tier talent, you need to work for Netflix. You know, so there's a way of monopolizing certain segments of content and pushing the competition out of that, which mostly is local broadcasters and their VOD services. So this is a negative impact, which is, however, not perceived as negative by the creators and producers, at least not in the first stage, because they have, you know, higher diversity of genres, for example. So you are able to work in a fantasy or horror genre in countries where there is no tradition of doing that. You know, but Netflix is allowing you to do that because it finds audience in other markets by distributing it globally, so it can, you know, it can get enough revenue in other markets. And the other big advantage is, of course, unprecedented cross-border circulation. Content from these countries, such as Poland, has never circulated so widely across borders as now via Netflix. But this pertains only Netflix originals. So if Netflix creates an original in Poland, it distributes it to 40 plus countries. It would, including the US, it would never be possible for any Polish producer or distributor or sales agent to accomplish this result. So there's a mix, of course, of positive and negative effects. The mix changes in time because there is this, and it was well described by platform studies people. There's a cycle in platforms of you know, of becoming more and more monopolist during their life cycle. So all the platforms are open in the beginning, but more and more centralized and monopolist as they mature, as they gain power. So for example, YouTube, you know, the way it demonetized creators, it's a well-documented process, which was a disaster for small creators. In the beginning, YouTube was considered as a very democratic platform, but it changed over time, and I think Netflix is also changing over time. It's not another HBO anymore, which it was in mid 2010s, but it's more like a commercial broadcaster for everybody now. So yeah, it's a difficult question, and I wouldn't say it's purely negative, and I wouldn't say that if Netflix leaves this region, the local players would be better off. Definitely not. But we need regulation, and we need rules. Yeah.
We have a great response. We have a question from Rejoice Abutsa. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. I study transnational Nollywood, and I'm very interested in how Netflix is approaching the Nigerian film market in often contradictory ways. In my study, I note that Nollywood films are following a repetitive genre on Netflix and not as explorative as they used to be. Do you see, and I think this falls right into what you're speaking about, do you see any similarities in the field you study, or do you see that shift with the type of content that producers use to put out versus what they now supply to Netflix?
Yeah, there are many differences, of course. As I said, production values, budget, the creative process, financing process, the diversity of genres, and so on. But it seems that as you mentioned yourself, there's a process, there is a cycle where Netflix is going from like more diverse, more daring projects towards more predictable, more derivative projects in some of these markets. It actually has more user data. Of course, after producing the first slate of local projects, it then has more user data which it can use to shape a new slate of projects so that it's more predictably successful. That's probably one reason, and the other reason is the overall corporate evolution of Netflix, which is moving towards more like mainstream populist production over time. So I would be eager to hear more about how this sort of production portfolio changed in Nigeria over time. That would be fascinating to know.
Yes, Rejoice. I'm also really interested in Netflix with Nollywood films. So I look forward to hearing more about your research, reading more. Do we have any more questions?
Slavina, you haven't had a chance to speak. You want to weigh in by unmuting yourself?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this talk, Petra. It was really fascinating. So I'm really interested in this sort of idea of like regionalizing through these industrial and production practices, and with the imagination of Eastern Europe sort of like leaking through into these practices. And I was sort of thinking about the kind of the significance of the metropolitan to the market for Netflix, and the kind of way in which this is also kind of constructing or regionalizing in particular ways, like in addition to kind of the larger region, also kind of more internal regionalizations that might happen. So I'm trying to construct a question here. It's just kind of like a thought that was occurring to me, but sort of so it's creating this really particular image and sort of taste and production that's kind of skewed according to these prevalent like urban rural divides as well. I'm curious if you see that, and sort of what you think of that kind of divide.
This is being stated by several researchers, that Netflix is constructing some kind of like global cosmopolitan urban class, which is more similar across countries than inside any country in terms of like social classes. So you are more similar to other Netflix users in other countries than you are to let's say lower social classes in a rural area in your own country. That's the idea. And I think in Poland, you might say that this is indeed the case with the choice of subjects and main characters. So, for example, a series called Sexify, which is probably the most successful one. You might heard about that. It's about university female students developing a sex app, which is like totally, let's say, totally. Totally urban, totally metropolitan, if you ever been to Poland, it's still quite strongly like agricultural rural country compared to other to its neighbors. So in Poland, I would say that's the case. If you look at the HBO Europe production, you can see another pattern, another set of patterns. HBO Europe production, although it's over, it's still a very interesting study case, because they sort of tried to export this formula of US quality TV, aesthetically, culturally, in terms of story construction and so on, and apply it to subjects which a Westerner would stereotypically link to Eastern Europe. So you had different kinds of crime stories about secret police agents, about communist times, very masculinist, or about early post-socialist capitalism and the masculine characters of fathers, gangsters, as a sort of allegory of brutal capitalism in this region. Or you have stories about borders between the East and the West, such as a Polish-Ukrainian border and so on. So there was this Cold War imaginary, which was sort of, to which these formulas of US quality TV was applied in a way. So you might get a sense of how HBO imagined, what might work in the region, but also outside the region, by exporting this content. And Netflix did a little bit of that as well, but then moved away. And it diversified. So Netflix is doing fantasy, is doing a youth series for young females, for example. It's doing queer stories and so on. So Netflix diversified, and it seems that it's testing and gathering data about what works and what doesn't. So it's I would say in terms of diversity, it's actually more interesting than HBO, although I personally liked the HBO series more than Netflix series, what they did regionally, but that's how it is now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, so far, I think pretty much everyone has had a chance to weigh in and join the discussion. Peter, do you have any final comments, perhaps about what you're doing next, the kind of work that you hope to continue?
Well, yeah. So one thing I do is I try to look at the audiovisual texts themselves. But look at how, for example, in the service production, in the big Netflix, Apple TV Plus, or Amazon series produced in Prague, how you can trace the locations and local labor. That's one of my projects, because that has been never done. There is a lot of work about runway production, globalization of production, and so on. And I have contributed to that too. But it's actually more challenging to see the traces of these production conditions in the films and series themselves. So that's what I do. Because Prague is often playing other cities. It's almost exclusively playing other cities in these productions. So it's sort of erased, as well as the local labor, but it leaves traces. So what are the textual traces of these modes of production? That's one thing. And the other thing is this sort of geographical approach, or regionalization approach to platform imperialism, to see how it works, from the perspective of this peripheral region, and how is it, or is it is not comparable to other peripheral regions globally. Yeah, these two.
Sounds fascinating. The idea of Prague being other cities always, and not able to be itself.
Yeah. You've given us so much to think about and read about, that I really appreciate the time you've taken and your generosity in sharing your knowledge. I just like to remind people that we do this because, frankly, I find the conference is expensive to get to. You hear a presentation, and we don't really have the time to chat with each other in an informal way like we do in this. So we hope to continue this series of informal presentations and discussions. So if you have an idea, perhaps you'd like to be a presenter yourself, please contact me or Nicole, and we'll set something up at a convenient time. Meanwhile, I did put at the beginning, you know about the 3 dots, if you want to copy the meeting chat on the right-hand side of your screen. At the top somewhere there is, somewhere in there is the link to our SIG website, where we keep all the previous sessions, and we'll make a copy. We'll make a copy of this presentation available, and I think a lot more people will be able to appreciate it that way. So, are there any other final comments? Okay, then. Thank you all for coming, for participating, and Peter, this has really been for me, the successful conclusion of a lot of emails back and forth. So thanks for staying with it, and best wishes with your work, and perhaps we'll see you again at the next conference.
Yeah, I'm looking forward. Thank you very much for taking your time.